Right, this is going to be another episode of Daring Minds here with me and Gio. It's going to be one of the two-man episodes. That's using man in the term of like mankind, you know, the historical. We won't get, here's the thing. We're not going to get into etymology of language. Some people get upset at that, believe it or not, you know, a little based reference there if anyone knows. But what I'll say is this. We're actually going to start this episode on quite a somber note, and there's a reason we don't actually have a guest. There's a lot of people, quite frankly, couldn't appear on this episode, believe it or not, because obviously this week there was the tragic passing of Twisten, the Vitality player, whose name was Carol Assenbrenner. I'm sure I've butchered that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, he actually passed away. I mean, you can go and read on Twitter the reasons why, but one of his teammates said that he'd taken his own life. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say on this. One is, the point of bringing it up is obviously not some sort of cynical cash. And I actually think we can make some very important and authentic points here. Like, one thing I wanted to say briefly was I did a Twitter post like this. If I remember, I'll link it in the description box below, because I've seen a lot of occasions where not just have people tragically passed away like this, and in circumstances where it comes as a shock and maybe no one even knew there was a problem going on. But I'd also say I actually see quite, in the last year or so, it feels like there's a lot of posts of people on social media who say that they're struggling mentally, or people doing the post where it says sort of I'm taking the social media break and stuff. And it certainly seems, I know, being on camera and being in the public eye, it can get to people. So all I'll say is I did a post which will be a lot more eloquent than I can be here. But I would just say, genuinely, if you're in that position, I know a classic thing people say is, you know, reach out, talk to someone. But another thing I would say to do for real is never underestimate how much you can essentially get yourself out of a funk or change your mindset by just literally changing the scenery and what you're doing. Like, literally do some exercise, go and do an activity, throw yourself into a project, reach out to friends and family, maybe they go and do something like have a weekend break with some relative of yours, or reconnect with someone. Basically do anything to get yourself out of your current state of mind that you're in. And I would say that the main message I would give, something I've used in my own life, is never underestimate that, like, even if in this moment, because the thing about emotion, obviously it could be so overwhelming and it can seem so defining, and in that moment it can seem like that emotion will never end. I would just say the experience of my life is it does, and it will pass. And these things sort of do change. You just can't always see it. It's like when you're in the middle of the storm, you can't even imagine it being a sunny day at that point in time. But you know, eventually, from experience, there will be a sunny day. You can get to that point. So I want to just get some thoughts from you initially.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the announcement was really shocking, not just because you don't expect something like that to happen. But I think also, and actually I didn't really comment that much publicly on it because a lot of my like friends and colleagues and stuff like that were making their posts, but they actually knew him personally, like especially friends of mine who worked on VCT EMEA. And I've never personally interacted with Twisten, and I've just kind of like seen him from afar. So I never really wanted to kind of like, take other people's, I think it's like tragic, but I don't want to like make it about me, right?
Yes,
like,
you don't want to seem like you're elbowing you in,
stepping on people's grief, right?
Get you. Yes.
So it was really surprising. I think like one of the things that really took me aback is just the fact he's 19.
Yes.
And I don't know. I think that part of it is like, it's very crazy. But I agree with you where I feel like over the last couple years, I mean, I'm
sure you've had your own battles with being a public figure and stuff, right?
Oh, of course. Like, there's, because I was just going to say, I've also noticed a lot more people be in positions where, I don't know if it's that bad in their case, but it's at least somewhere on that spectrum, right?
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I would say in the last couple of years, I've probably had the hardest battles with my own mental health than any other time in my life, and I would imagine that I'm certainly not unique there either. And it's really, yeah, I don't know, it is really rough. Like, I read your tweet that you did, and I thought it was I actually thought it was very sincere. Not that I thought that it was going to be insincere necessarily, but like, I obviously didn't really know what to expect from it. It definitely sounded like it had come from some kind of experience. I think like it's so hard because whenever people say, just please always reach out to someone, I think when you're in that position, even if you know that you can do that, and even if you do that, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to do anything.
Certainly.
And I think that's what makes it feel so very futile in a lot of cases and to a lot of people. And it's obviously just really sad that this is just one of those instances where you couldn't push yourself to just make it through to the next day where maybe you'd feel a little bit better. And that's not something to be criticized necessarily. It's just kind of one of those things. But yeah, I don't know. It's really rough. And I think that one thing I'm really glad about is that I was really glad that there wasn't anyone who was like, oh, but he's a pro player. He had like the dream life. I'm really glad I didn't see anybody who was like that. You know, I think like one thing that you kind of like learn, whether it's from your own experiences or experiences of others, is that in a lot of cases, it kind of doesn't really matter what you have or what, you know, what your status is or anything like that, because these sorts of things are, you know, indiscriminate when it comes to things.
They
like
don't care
that.
how much money you've got put that way. I mean, people often say the same thing, you know, about like super celebrities. If they hear they're depressed, oh, boo-hoo, he's in a mansion. It's like, mate, the depression still comes for that person. It's not like he looks at his bank account and feels great. That life doesn't work that way, as you say. Like, it comes for everyone, no matter their age, what space you're in. It's a mental condition in this scenario. It's a frame of mind, right?
Yeah, and it's not something that's unique to certain age groups, but I remember being in my late teens and early 20s, and I had friends who were having their own battles at that time. And now, you know, however long down the line are very different in a good way, right? And so I think that's also why kind of the age aspect to this is so painful, because everyone I know who had those sorts of struggles when they were a teenager don't anymore.
You just wish the person could see what it could be like 10 years later, right?
And I think that's the thing, is like in that position, you're sort of like, I don't really care about 10 years because I don't know how to get up tomorrow. And I don't know how to get out of what I'm trapped in right now. It's always that feeling of like, I don't know what I can do to influence my life right now. I don't know how to get out of the immediate situation that I'm in. And even if maybe you know that like, yeah, sure, if I stuck around, things will get better eventually, but like, you know, what happens in that meantime? Like that, you know, that's like a very, very scary thing. And yeah, I mean, from what I could gather, it seemed like there were a number of friends, including his family, because I saw a statement that got translated that his mother had done. You know, people seem to be aware that he was struggling, which is a good thing. A good thing in the sense of it means that like he hasn't like kept it to himself. But like the sad truth is, unless someone is making certain decisions along these lines directly in front of you, like you can't stop it. You know, if someone kind of goes and does that. So, yeah, no, it's just, yeah, super, super sad. And, yeah, there isn't really a straight up answer. Like there's elements of kind of like what you said that I think is true, but I think it's also a lot more nuanced than to kind of just give a black and white agreement or disagreement with here. Cause obviously like the whole joke that people make is like, oh yeah, I'll just go to the gym. That will fix my depression. It's like, well, it can have like really good effects.
It's not the panacea though, clearly, yes.
I'm like, the difference exercise has in your life is crazy, but like, it's not gonna cure you. But I think that's the point. It's about, I don't know, like incremental things. But it can be really hard to do incremental things when you feel like you don't have it in you to see the whole process through.
One thing I would say along the lines that you're describing here is, I know actually he's a writer who sadly also committed suicide, was a writer called David Foster Wallace. And one thing he described about the kind of depression that can lead someone to those thoughts, I think this might be a useful framing technique for people to understand that it's not as simple as thinking you could rewind the clock and sort of say something to them and it would make them not commit the act, which is, he said, that kind of depression is like if you imagine that the person in this analogy, I mean, they obviously literally could do it this way. If they imagine in the analogy that they were jumping out of a window, they're not jumping out the window because they want to die and no longer be in that room. It's like the depression is like the room is on fire. And so what happens is at that point in time, it feels like the only solution to them is to jump out the window. But even though, you know, that must be irrationally, they must know that can't really solve the problem. And so, yeah, I would just say in this scenario, I think what you're accurately saying here is no one can know the frame of mind of someone like this. And certainly even though while I would say if you are someone in this scenario, there is a universality to it. Like you're noticing even here, we're clearly talking like we've experienced dark nights of the soul, as they classically call it. At the same time, each person's version of that could be so different that, as you say, what might be great advice for one person might be terrible advice for someone else. In fact, in this scenario, that's why I just try to say it's the idea of just try anything, just try things, reach out to people, because the people who know you are going to know you better as well. And then I had one more thing I just wanted to quickly say, which is I would end this segment by just saying something which might actually seem strange to people if they know my old persona, which is I would just say, like, this is the sort of person, and then his family especially, who would be in our thoughts. Now, I will say one thing that used to be an easy dunk people used to do, I've done it myself, is you do that thing where you go like, oh, thoughts and prayers, you know, like don't block bullets, or they don't bring someone back to life. And I used to say that myself, right? And one thing I remember, I think I heard this in an interview with Peter Hitchens once. He said the kind of person that annoys him the most in older age is basically himself when he was younger, when they're sort of like the same, like smug, know-it-all, they think they've got all the answers. And what I'll say I had to learn over the years was, it's not about whether you're a religious person, you believe in the power of, you know, thoughts or prayers or whatever. I'm not religious, but I don't pray. But in the sense of the thoughts, the reason why saying someone's in your thoughts is really meaningful is just the human gesture. Like if their family did see that, they're going to go, oh, that is important. I do want to know that people remember this person and that they think of him fondly and that they care, quite frankly. That just even saying that, I agree that there's a human connection there that goes beyond the rationality of like, it doesn't literally do something, but in a sense, it actually can have an effect. And I also think for you yourself, it might help you with the process of going past this and not letting it weigh you down and hurt you in a certain way. You find a way to, like, in a positive way, think of the person and try and see what was great about them. And one thing I think we've tried to do here is impart that if someone out there is part way along that path, this doesn't have to be the way it ends. There can be another end to the story.
Yeah, and I want to also just mention that there's a number of Valorant content creators. I think this was proposed by Sliggy, so I think he's the kind of pioneer here. Okay. Who are going to be, over the course of Masters Tokyo, for every shorty kill that happens in the game, they're going to be donating $25 to a mental health charity. I don't know if they've picked which one yet. Right. But because Twisten's whole thing was his, like, signature move or something, right? Kills, that was his thing, man. Okay. So every shorty kill that's gotten in Masters Tokyo, there's going to be a number of content creators who are going to be doing a charity drive with that. So I don't know if there's going to be like some kind of tribute or something at the event. I mean, I guess we'll see, but at least that's going on as well, kind of. So people are doing a good thing.
Yes. Right. Okay. I think we gave that appropriate space and dealt with it quite delicately. Right. We'll obviously jump into some analysis of Valorant now. VCT Tokyo is obviously the big event coming up, right? First thing I would just ask you at the outset is, I thought we did a good job framing earlier in the year the fact that the lock-in tournament did have so many weird elements to it, where it's like it's new lineups, or the maddest obviously was people could get eliminated in one match. So you had some really big teams go there, losing one match, and people really were just like, cut half the team. It's like, what's the first match they played? So what I want to ask is, even though that did end up being cool, that's why I love the open circuit personally. I like having big tournaments, not just big leagues only. What do you think? Is this actually more in the spirit for you of like the Masters tournaments? Is this real VCT like we remember?
Yeah. I mean, this is proper VCT, and that's how it was always supposed to be as well. Like, lock-in was never supposed to be a serious tournament in the same way. Lock-in was basically like a glorified show match that ended up giving EMEA an extra Masters spot, but that's kind of it. This is a proper Masters tournament, and it's going to be the only one this year as well because of lock-in. I think they'll probably do 2 next year, but this is the only one. No single elimination bracket in this one, so I don't know, maybe there'll be like some miracle lower bracket run or something.
Yeah, also for people who don't know, It basically has the same concept as what they were doing at the end of last year in VCT, where you do the two groups, but you have the ones that are the winner teams are waiting for the playoff, and then you come out of the groups and face off against them. So it's the similar concept where you have the double elim bracket for the actual playoffs, which I have to say, I try to get this into every game, but people know now in League from MSI, lower bracket is a fantastic format. But we saw it in VCT as well. Like, if people don't know, some of the champions of the tournaments last year came from the lower bracket. So, I mean, for me, it's always the coolest because you can get the rematch. You can get the team where it's like they are the best team, but they lose the one match, then they just run through everyone. Or you have the complete nobody team who they play loads of best of X's, and suddenly everyone has mad respect for them and knows that they're really good.
Yeah, I mean, and I was just about to look it up actually, but as far as I'm aware, the last time that there was a single elimination bracket will have been Masters Berlin. I'm just checking to see if Champions 2021 had one. Oh, Champions 2021 did have one. Okay, yes. So Champs 2021 was the last single elimination bracket that we actually had in a Masters event, or a VCT International. So they've really adopted the double elimination for quite some time. League have been lagging with that one. Yep. I'm glad they finally did it, but this isn't an MSI podcast, I guess. Yeah, and like you said, there is going to be the buy into the bracket, although I don't think those have been seeded yet, because I have the bracket up here and they aren't actually in. But yeah, there's just going to be two groups for the, I suppose, GSL portion of it, and those have been seeded. I mean, yeah,
drawn
they've been seeded.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we know what like the first games are going to be for those.
Right. Opening question then: which of the two groups looks harder?
I've got them in front of me.
It's Group A, right?
I think Group A, but. Okay, so DRX is obviously the highest seed for Pacific, and DRX are in Group B. But I've always been like a bit of a DRX cynic. I know there are people out there like Achilleos who believe very strongly in DRX, and traditionally they are probably one of the best performing rosters in Valorant history. But they've never quite been good enough. And I mean, I fully expect them to make it through the group, but I don't know if they themselves are good enough to be insane. The other thing, and this is something that is definitely worth bringing up. So Evil Geniuses are in Group B, and I would have thought that they weren't going to get through if the original whole thing about the fact that Demon One didn't have a passport and couldn't go to Japan, if he were not going to be on the roster. But I've seen a lot on social media that apparently Demon One is in Japan. So assuming that he's playing with EG could be a very, very hard team in that group, because they were exceptionally good in the Americas playoffs. But yeah, at Group A, I mean, NRG, I think that NRG are probably better than their playoffs run would have you believe. I think that Navi, even though they're technically the 4th seed from EMEA, they actually came 2nd in the standings in EMEA. And I think they are a contender for potential best team in the world. EDG is the best team from China. I can't really give a ton of insight into them because we don't really get to watch Chinese, or rather you have to really go out of your way to watch Chinese Valorant, which I don't do. And then T1, who are the 2nd seed from Pacific, but they still have some of the best Korean players in the entire region. So I don't really look at that and say, oh, they're a bit crap, because they're definitely not. So yeah, I think Group A for me.
Okay. Right. One of the questions you brought up NRG already. Obviously, the core of this team is fabulously experienced, successful, has been in these tournaments one of the best teams we've ever seen. Right. Mm-hmm. What do you actually think NRG is like in this lineup, where they've got in Ardis and obviously the year thing that's been and gone ages ago now? Is NRG a true successor
the
to the
wasn't
Optic?
NRG, that was C9.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's the Ye thing's way behind them, and that's some separate. They used to have a player called Ye when they were called Optic, right? I don't really know why this is a big deal.
Yes, okay.
And the player called
Ye
Marv
was
as
on
well.
Optic.
Yeah, okay, it's all good. We're on the same page. And point is that is well behind them now. They've had Ardis for a while now. What do you actually think of the lineup with Ardis? Like, should we have similar expectation? Can they win the tournament?
I think it's possible that they could, but I don't anticipate them winning the tournament. I mean, I don't know. So the whole thing with NRG in playoffs was really strange. Like, their first couple of games, their first game against Evil Geniuses was really, really lackluster. And then their next game was against Furia. That was a 2-0, but it was Furia, so I didn't really expect any different. And then when they played Cloud9 again, that was a 2-1, which they ended up beating them in overtime on the third map in that game. And the other two maps weren't exactly, they weren't exactly stomps. So their whole playoffs run was a little bit shaky, to be honest with you. They didn't take a single map in the finals against Loud. So, that the age-old, I say age-old, but in Valorant terms, the age-old rivalry is still very, very firmly in Loud's favor. I think that NRG look better than they did earlier on in the stage, but I don't think they are going to win this tournament. I don't think they'll end up in finals. Okay. As for how far they do go, I would comfortably assume that they'll make it out of Group A, but I could also see there being an upset where they don't.
There's some dangerous teams there, right?
Sorry?
There's some dangerous teams there that can get you.
Yeah, very much so.
There'll be a one, especially, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think the T1 and EDG. T1.
Oh, it looks like I'm going to guess everything is. I'm going to guess is everything a best of 3 actually? Because it looks like you do a Veto. Yes, everything's best of 3 actually. It used to be best of 1 the openers. So I guess in theory it gives the favourites a little bit more edge.
Yeah. But I think NRG and Navi will get out of that group. But I could absolutely see NRG sort of making it a couple games into the playoffs bracket and that sort of being it. They could end up doing really well. It's not that I think these players are washed or anything like that. And actually, players like Crashies and Victor have played really well. I think Som has been one of the most impressive sort of new players of the partnerships.
Oh, okay. Like a breakout play or something? Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing with Som was the joke was that he's like a streamer, right? Yes. And he was just some, ranked player. Yeah. But he's been a really, really good smoker for them. And there are some times where he just gets these insane multi-kills, particularly late into a round, and can be a really, really clutch player. So, I think very, very highly of him. Ardis, I think it took a little bit of time for him to kind of settle in the role that he was playing. Because I remember at Lock-In and at the beginning of the season, they were putting him on Sage, for example. He wasn't really getting to play a lot of Jet. I think that the current meta allows for him to do that a little bit more. But he's not necessarily always going to be the one who's the really flashy player. We are kind of in a double duelist meta at the moment, so that, even the chance to be flashy is being shared between 2 people. But I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. That kind of just means that the team can be well balanced. But yeah, I mean, I think they're a really good team. I just think that the competition also is really good. I don't know.
Should we pivot and talk about Navi then?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to add one last thing. I think it also depends on how fueled by rage and vengeance Chet is going to be after some of Chet's little Twitter quips that he had during the playoffs. Okay. He may just be so mad that he coaches them into the finals.
It would obviously be awesome if they play against EG in the playoffs. That's the matchup you want for obvious reasons.
Funny. I mean, yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yes, there's definitely was a bit of a clash between Chet and Potter on the timeline over that. So that would be funny. Just for
if people don't know,
rivalry.
there's another angle there to which is why I think he also is mad, which is people won't know. In CSGO, he was the Evil Genius's coach at one point in time. And as far as I know, they didn't let him go in sort of a way that he thought was like legit. So I imagine even the orc he actually just despises. So there's all sorts of like potential boxes to check there. But anyway, yeah, if we pivot and talk about Navi, as you said, this is the team that people really are hyped. Like this could be maybe like the best team. Obviously, they were really great at the lock-in, right? Is this a squad? Like one thing I noticed when I was looking up, obviously CNED's the guy they brought in instead of Ardis for this lineup.
Yeah.
I noticed actually he was spamming quite a lot of the Yoru, which is obviously not always being picked by all the players in this position. So what do you think about Navi and their potential? Like, if it can be the best team in the world, they can win the tournament then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a lot of faith in Navi since the beginning, just because I think on paper their roster is insane. I mean, and I'm not unique here at all, but I'm a very, very big Angel enjoyer. I think he is in contention for being the best IGL in the region. Probably he and Boaster are kind of fighting for that spot, right? And just in general, their whole roster is amazing. I was a really big fan of the FPX roster last year. CNED I was really interested in. I actually want to look up to see where he sits in the region, because the thing with CNED is my concern about him going into the beginning of the season just was that I didn't think that his ceiling was necessarily as high as Ardis, which feels a little strange to say because back in 2021, CNED was 100% the guy that you were going to be looking at and being
the hard carry, right?
He is the best jet in the world. And I just don't know if that's still true. So I want to try and see where he is in the ACS of the region. Give me a second. Well, he's not in the top 10. How far do I have to scroll down to find him? Let's control an F. Oh no, he is. I just missed his name. I'm an idiot. Okay, he's sixth. He's sixth.
Okay, that's pretty good then.
So, okay, that is pretty good. Yeah. That's better than my fears were at the beginning of the stage. Actually, I don't even know if I expected him to be bad. I just
had big shoes to fill.
As good. He definitely had big shoes to fill, and Ascend had sort of been off the scene for a little while at that point.
Yep.
But yeah, like I said, Navi, they came second in the standings. So the actual regular season, they were just behind Fnatic. And then they didn't do as well in the playoffs. And the only reason that they're in Tokyo is because Fnatic obviously earned the 4th spot for EMEA. So they didn't actually make it to the lower bracket final. So I don't know, and even like kind of looking, because I only saw some of the EMEA playoffs, but looking at like the games that they won and lost, they lost the lower bracket semi to Foot, who are obviously also in at Tokyo. And they lost their upper bracket game to Team Liquid, but that's a little bit more fair because Team Liquid ended up winning the entire region. So you can kind of justify that a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're definitely quite creative. You mentioned the whole Yoru thing, and I think that it's definitely not something we see in America particularly. But I think that there are, with EMEA having kind of consolidated what was previously the EU and the Turkish regions, there's been a bit of a cross-pollination in some of the kind of play styles there. And playing Yoru, particularly this year, was something that was kind of brought over from, I think, the Turkish teams were quite a fan of that. I remember Kushner X playing quite a bit of Yoru at the beginning of the year. So I think that's definitely a regional thing more than anything.
Do you like that agent pick? Is it a good one for you?
Yoru? I mean, I suppose it depends on the person and it depends on the map, because it was really Pearl that he was quite popular on. He's fine, but there's
quite a few duelists you can pick at the moment, right?
Yeah, there isn't necessarily a map or an instance where I would like hands down be like, Yoru is your best bet.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, okay, if you've got a player who feels particularly comfortable in that agent and you've got your little special strats that you've kind of cooked up, okay, yeah, sure. But as a general, answer to that question, no, there isn't really a sort of like meta comp that I would switch out one agent and put Yoru in 4, if that makes sense.
Right, let's talk then about a team that we have talked to death on this show. But what makes it cool this year to talk about them, Team Liquid, is they actually did the changes necessary. They've actually got in really good players. And suddenly, as you said, like they won from the lower bracket EMEA, like they actually are a really good team now. They've sort of like made good on what the team always should have been able to do, right?
Yes, and they've also kind of made that change. Again, this is another team that the beginning of the season you'd look at and you'd be like, oh God, what's happening here? And they've actually kind of, you know, as time does, they've sort of pulled themselves together and been able to get, you know, a little bit more coordinated with things. Because I think one of the problems at the beginning of the season was just really that certain players on the team looked a little bit on different pages to each other. I remember one of the big complaints was kind of, it felt like Redgar and Nats were kind of, you know, like Nats was always going to be great because he's Nats and he sort of has a very independent job. But Redgar would be on a page with Nats, and Nats can be on a page with everyone else, but Redgar wasn't necessarily on a page with everyone else. That seemed to be the main sort of observation regarding them. I think one of the big things that people widely sort of ascribe a lot of Team Liquid's improvement to, which I would be inclined to agree with, is just Safe. Like Safe has played really, really well. I think he was someone who, at the beginning of the season, had a number of doubters. Like, there were quite a few people who were like, is he good enough to be on the team? And I keep seeing people memeing that, or at least when the EMEA playoffs were going on, people were memeing that, and they were like, oh yeah, what was that about Safe not being good enough? Because he's just been a really exceptional player. I think he's fit the really flexible duelist role that's kind of being demanded by the meta at the moment really well. So, you know, he's played the Jet, he's played the Raze, he's played the Neon, and he's putting up consistently good performance as a direct result on all of those agents. And I don't know if it's just that he seems to really fit the meta. There's obviously got to be at least some portion of it that's he fits the team as well. And obviously he's been on the team with Yampi and Soulcast for some time. So yeah, he's been a really, really strong player for them as well. And I think that when you've got these individually really strong players on each of their respective roles, and you give them enough time to kind of gel and kind of get on the same page as each other regarding the IGLing, then yeah, you do kind of get the results like we have now. One of my big questions though, and I suppose this will be answered when Tokyo actually happens, is did Liquid only win EMEA playoffs because Fnatic knew they didn't need to? Like, were Fnatic hiding strats?
Right. Okay.
Exactly. Like, did Fnatic feel just right? Did they win because they were actually straight up the better team, or did they win because Fnatic didn't put 100% on the gas?
By the way, just so people understand, obviously you're not in any way implying through the game. It's just essentially when you, like you say, when you know you've made it, it might be more like you experiment a bit or you just play a bit looser and you think, look, it's cool if we win, but it doesn't matter if we don't. It's not the same as if you're in the elimination match, it's champions final, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like you might play like your standard strategies, but not necessarily your special strategies that you would pull out and stuff like that, because that's the stuff that you want to save. So yeah, I don't know. I also think, well, okay, I don't know if this is biased from my own.
If it is, that's the whole point of being an analyst, to be biased. Just let people know the biases and lean into it. Go on.
Well, the point is because this is something where I could numerically be wrong.
Come on.
But I was going to say, I think that Yampi's playing better than he has done in the past, but I think that I have always had a more negative opinion of Yampi than the general consensus seems to be.
A lot of the people who bring on the show thought he was a good player, so...
I've never thought he's a bad player, but I always thought that he was kind of misplaced in the team.
Right.
And, you know, I especially found it very strange when he was IGLing as a Jet and stuff like that. And he was mechanically a great Jet, but I always felt like the sort of kind of Jet that he was playing was never quite in line with the kind of Jet everyone else was playing. Like in the world where CNED was the world leading Jet and he was this insane, he would just dash in, be this incredible, initiation onto a site and get what he needs to. Yampy wouldn't necessarily always be that. So I always kind of had criticisms about him because of that, but it wasn't because I thought he was unskilled. However, he's kind of shifted where he's at. He's been playing Killjoy again, which was something that I remember him playing way back when, and then he kind of like went to the Jet, and I remember people were a little bit undecided as to whether or not they even liked him on the Killjoy. And I'm talking like mid 2021 at this point. But he's been playing some of that. He's been playing some Sky, which is a very, very meta pick at the moment, which is also like interesting to me because actually that always used to be Soulcast's agent.
Right.
Soulcast was always quite good at Sky, I think. But again, just because of sort of like role shifts and meta shifts and stuff.
I like the way they've still got that element of Team Liquid where people just swap like what they play and what
and
it still exists, I guess. Okay.
I think we are in an era where that's kind of more
right.
palatable.
Right.
Whereas kind of like back in 2021, you sort of needed the more steadfast roles, I think.
Yes.
But for example, like there's so many initiators in the game that it's actually okay for both Yampy and Soulcast to play, to kind of cover the initiator role between the two of them. And then like if Soulcast needs to play Viper or if Yampy needs to play Killjoy, for example, like I said, you can kind of do that. So they sort of have they're sort of fingers in all the pies, I guess, which, and they can spread that skill out. And I think that's really good, especially if you've got a strong voice coming from Redgar, which is something that I always thought Team Liquid lacked. Like, in the same way that maybe not quite the same, but in a similar vein to how it irritated me with Sentinels, like, I always felt like Team Liquid needed a stronger voice, because it was, at one point it was Yampy, at one point it was fucking Scream. Like, so, I think, like, having that strong central voice, you have like a really good anchor from Nats who can kind of do that he needs to. And then Yampy, Soulcast, and Safe are all playing things that they can be flexible on, they can pop off on, and they can be fluid with who is playing what. I think that's a really good kind of environment compared to the things that led me to criticize Team Liquid in the past.
Let's talk about the other EMEA teams. So obviously, Fnatic, as you say, people would have considered them the number one team because of the lock-in, etc. Here, they did win in the upper bracket against Team Liquid. They did make the final. They lost the final, but as you said, of all the teams in the tournament, they're the one who, in theory, has the least sort of like direct motivation to win that game, which doesn't mean they didn't try, but as you say, I actually think in Valorant, especially with the format of the tournaments, in something like Counter-Strike, you play a tournament every 2 or 3 weeks, so you don't really save things generally because they won't even be in date by then. But actually, if you're on the same patch, especially in a game like this, sometimes it might be worth saving something 2 weeks if you could to go and play at the actual finals. So Fnatic, there's no reason to doubt them. Still a very good team, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm not doubting them at all. Definitely not. I think you'd be a fool to. Again, I mean, I could honestly see it being a Fnatic Loud final again. And maybe you're the kind of person out there who really enjoys repeats of finals. I am generally not.
Okay.
But I could honestly see it happening because both of the teams have just looked infallible. Fnatic didn't lose a single game in the regular season.
Seems like their GM's killed it. Whoever actually did do that, if it was Mini, they killed it. I mean, at the time, everyone memed on him for that headline where he was saying like Leo was the best at whatever. What now? What now exactly?
They lost a single map in the whole regular season. Like, it is ridiculous. So, I mean, Fnatic, I think, are probably the team to beat. I mean, Loud, like I said, they're also up there as well. And I've watched Loud a little more closely purely by virtue of them being in the Americas region. But Fnatic are just a very, very scary team at the moment. I think that they've always kind of had the infrastructure to be that. And ever since the beginning of this year, now that they have the roster that they do have and seem to have kind of tapped into their special sauce, I don't know what would have to happen for them to suddenly become terrible. I mean, I know there were a lot of jokes when Icebox came out of the map pool that, oh no, Fnatic losing Icebox. Like, it is but a drop in the ocean, So, I'm very interested to see how they're going to be like seeded, because obviously they've got they'll have a bye. So to see who it is that they're going to end up playing against first, and I would love to see them challenged in the first game. I'd love to see them go against a team that's actually really hard, but I would imagine that they'll probably end up being seeded against one of the, I don't really know how it's going to work, but you don't usually put the really high teams above the.
Here's a question for you then.
Really,
so I looked up the ACS, since that's your stat you're going off. Is Durka the best Raze player? Looks like he's pretty good, mate. I
mean, he is the highest rated Raze player. I'm trying to think who I would put in contention with that. Because you could argue, I guess you would put him up against someone like Zeppa or Victor. But I think I'd probably still put Durka at the top. I mean, Durka's just like something else. I don't know. Durka really is just something else. Like, I think that, especially since Ye has kind of fallen off the face of the earth, Durka is almost certainly the best all-round duelist in the world. Because even, it's not that Ye can't play those roles, and let's just pretend that Ye hasn't just bombed out of tier 2 for 1 second. Like, the thing that made Ye so good was really how he played Chamber in the Chamber meta. And yes, that's not technically a duelist, but come on, it is. And he was a great Jet player, but I don't think he was like a Jet player that you can't sleep at night because you're too busy thinking about Ye playing Jet. I mean, it was always Ye on Chamber. That was the story. But the thing is, in that meta, you never needed to play anything that wasn't Chamber. Whereas I think what Durka shows, I mean, obviously, yes, most people have spoken about his Jet historically because that has been predominantly what he's needed to play. But his all-round performance on duelists, I don't think there's another player who you could say their average across all duelists is as good. Or average, at least across the two main duelist sub-roles, is as good. Yeah, because there are definitely some people who are really good individual Jets. I mean, I still think Tens could be in that conversation. But would I put Tens' Raze in that conversation? No.
Okay. Right, as you mentioned, obviously Loud remains a team, even though they lost those players to Sentinels. Apparently these guys know the GM game too, because still one of the best teams in the entire world, right? A team that, I mean, you're implying they could win this tournament too. Oh,
100%. I really wanted the Loud NRG final. I wanted that to be better than it was. Loud played really good. I mean, to be honest, the Loud Evil Geniuses game was a little bit more interesting to me because there was actually some bite from Evil Geniuses in that. I don't know what it is with Loud. It just seems like if they ever have a blip, they're like a black hole. You feed stuff into them and they just get better. Like they can have they can have a bad thing and whatever it is they're doing next is going to be better than what it was previously. I just think that they're an incredibly impressive team. Let me just get the roster up. Oh my goodness. They're an incredibly impressive team. Aspas, actually, kind of just going back to that previous conversation, I wouldn't put Aspas as an equally all-round duelist as Durka is, but he is definitely one of those people who've been in the conversation for best Jet, just a Jet. Aspas is inhuman. I love that. I believe that it was Sadhak who got the MVP for the, let me just check because it should say, MVP was Sadhak. And I remember what he said in their post-game interview that they did after the Americas finals was he was like, I don't know why I've been given MVP. And the thing is Sadhak, because, he's giving so many of the calls and stuff like that. And so I think he was kind of really surprised because a lot of the flashiness comes from players like Aspas, like Les, sorry. And And so he didn't necessarily expect to get that. But I think that's such a testament to them, and the fact that you can see where that coordination and where the kind of thought processes come from, and just how in tune with each other they are. And that's the really impressive thing as well, of course, about the fact that they lost those 2 players. Because, I mean, Sudhak wasn't originally on Loud. He wasn't on Loud previously. He was one of the 2 who's been brought in. And so for them to be as in tune as they are is so monumentally impressive. Just after the short time that they've kind of been together, I think that, you know, also it's really easy to allow the controller players to go under the radar when you're talking about a team that has someone like Aspas on it. But Tui's playing Omen has also been absolutely unreal. And I think one of the really important things about these players on Loud is that while there are obviously a few of them who aren't necessarily there to pop off, every single one of these players has the capability to do it when it matters. So, like, you can have Tui's who are like, plays a really good one way, and it's like, cool, you've done your job. And then he'll just get a 3K straight through it. And it's like, well, you weren't supposed to do that, but it was really good, and that's just won you the round. And yeah, I mean, Sudhak has those rounds as well, where it's like, okay, well, you're not the guy who was meant to be doing that, but the fact you did it is really cool, and that means, cool, you're about to win. You're on match point. And so the fact that every single member of this team has that capability to be able to do that is a really big deal. And they're always so creative. They always kind of like bring something new out. Like they're not one of these teams that just kind of repeats the same thing over and over. And I think that makes it really hard to counter-strat them. I think that's probably going to make it hard for the teams that they're going to be playing against in Tokyo, who obviously would have seen them play a number of things. One of the really, really huge things from this finals that was just gone was the map veto, because Loud picked, I think it was Fracture. Oh my goodness, I could be getting it wrong. But either way, it was, everyone was like, we've never seen them play this map. And one of the biggest things that was kind of proven off of the back of that finals was that where people may have thought that Loud's map pool was limited, it's certainly not. And so I think that's probably going to send a shiver down people's spines as well, because now it's like, well, you know, we thought that maybe we knew where this team's weaknesses were and where they weren't comfortable with playing. And now we don't, because we've literally just seen them bulldoze another team.
Also, I will say, in map vetoes, that's another classic example of something you can do in a final when you know you qualified, is you can try and show we can play this map. So as you're saying, if that's something that someone else would have studied, like this is going to be our pick, you might have to think twice now.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the really big things that Loud have kind of got going for them after this playoffs that's just gone by, because that was something that people weren't expecting. And so, yeah, I think that Loud always kind of just have something else up their sleeve. They're just very resourceful and very creative and just extraordinarily skilled on individual levels, while also still being greater than some of their parts. So, you know, I have had my moments of rooting against Loud, and I've kind of got to that point in my life where I've realized it's fucking useless. They're nuts. So I would really love to see Loud versus Fnatic again.
Well, a team who may indeed not have something up their sleeve is obviously Paper Rex, who I've left to last, because no one still yet knows if something is going to actually make it to Tokyo. 5 days ago, it was reported there might be visa problems. He comes from Russia, if people don't know. But also, if no one knows, this is a player that was basically plucked out of nowhere. He used to play in the Japanese league, and then he joined this team a few months back. And obviously, everyone knows the classic Paper Rex. Everyone knows how exciting they are. But if you're a top seed, especially, and you end up not having one of your players make it is going to sort of dampen the mood. It is going to make it so like people aren't going to expect the same things from you. They're not going to expect you, because obviously you want Paper X to always be the ultimate dark horse, don't you? You want them to be the team that could terrorize anyone and make a deep run.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a few thoughts about Paper X. So the something thing is definitely leaves question marks, because also like Benkai's not part of the team anymore either, you know, because
there's no easy backup to go to, right? I see.
Yeah, I haven't seen an update about something.
No, I was Googling here and I can't see anything. It seems like that's the last. Yeah, that's the last.
I've literally been judging it all by what I've seen on Reddit and Twitter. Yeah, and as you were saying it, I was thinking, oh yeah, I haven't seen anything new about that. So I have no idea. But the thing with Paper X as well is,
I put it this way, there was a thread yesterday where some guy goes like, oh, I can't wait to see the Jet showdown between Demon One and something. And all the posts are just people doing that meme of like, does he know? Does he know? Because it's like, obviously that poor guy, if he hasn't kept up to date, like you might never see that. We don't know. Who knows?
That's so funny. I mean, the thing with Paper X is I have had... I've been skeptical about them, especially since lock-in. I think the thing with lock-in, what that said to me about Paper X is they're one-trick ponies. You know, and I think I might have made this comparison before, so forgive me if I have. My favorite team back in Rainbow Six was a Russian team called Team Empire. And when Team Empire first came on the scene, they were this team that just kind of came out of nowhere and they were just incredible. Like no one could beat them. And like in the space of a couple months, they had won a couple of like Pro League finals, a major, they were in the World Championship finals. And we're talking like over like a 5-month period. And the thing with Paper X, the thing with Empire is the reason why they were so good, like everyone knew what made them good. They knew how they played. There wasn't anything secret going on. There wasn't anything people couldn't understand. They just didn't know how to beat them. And then eventually they did. Eventually they just kind of cracked it. And when that point came, Team Empire had this really big lull because that was their way of playing. That was their identity. It was their playstyle. And it took them quite some time. I'm talking maybe a year or so to get to a point where they kind of got themselves back to being one of these sort of top teams. But it required a lot of adaptation and a lot of growth and some roster change. And when I saw Paper X play at Lock-In, it really reminded me of that because Paper X have always had this one specific playstyle that was based around Jing and Forsaken being the way they're being, and it wasn't that people didn't understand what they were doing because they perfectly well did. They just couldn't do anything about it. And for a lot of teams, especially teams from EMEA and North America, well, actually both the Americas, it was because they're simply not used to playing a team that plays like that. And when Lock-In actually happened, Paper X, they were eliminated in the first round. Because it sort of got to that point where actually that wasn't so hard for people to deal with anymore. Okay. And obviously the change in the meta, I think, helps because, you know, people weren't relying on Chamber as, you know, with as tenaciously as they were before. Yeah, they kind of got to this point where actually Paper X throwing that same strategy at them wasn't as effective as it used to be. So my kind of skepticism with Paper X has come from that fact where I'm like, okay, what else have they got? Now, bringing in something into the team has been a really good thing. You kind of mentioned the Jet thing, and that sort of provides a little bit of flavor, a little difference in the way that they play, a bit of a role shift. And if he can't play, what happens then? Do they default back to the last way? Because the last version of the roster was the one with Benkai in it. So I know obviously he's not on the team anymore, so I don't believe they can just bring him in. But let's say in our hypothetical that they could, is the way that iteration of the team plays just the same as the old one? You know, I'm sure that's an oversimplification, but the point is that I think I'm going to remain skeptical about Paper X until I see them internationally do something of note again. And it's not that I don't believe in the individual abilities of the players. It's just I think that there has been some fatigue in their output, both because other teams have adapted to them and also because as the metas have changed, the traditional playstyle has also changed, and it's perhaps come along to a playstyle that is a little bit better at countering what Paper X have always been good at. It is a really aggressive playstyle at the moment. Yeah, I mean, yes, we have this kind of double controller heavy meta right now, so you have a lot of setup, but also aggression can be really rewarded as well, just because of the limitations that you're putting on the map regarding things like smokes, and also because on a number of maps you have a double duelist meta as well. And you really lean into, for example, initiators like Sky, who can be huge info gatherers. You have tons of flashes, you have the ability to stun people, you know, stuff like that. So aggression can be really rewarded, which means that the Paper X style aggression could just be met head on with a similar level of aggression from another team who are no longer just kind of holding this one chamber in their one spot and waiting for him to get the opening pick before they fucking do anything. Do you know what I mean? So I'm healthily skeptical, but I would be happy to be proven wrong, is the TLDR.
Right, what we'll do is I've got a couple of questions now that are about like which team will do what, and some of them are spicier, but I'll see it because I think anyone who's going to be an analyst. Look, no one's pretending to be psychic. We can't really know who wins the matches, but I do like it if people nail themselves down. You put you on the mast, as it were. So first and foremost, you've implied the final could be Fnatic. Like, who wins this tournament? Pick one team for me. Who wins this tournament?
Fnatic.
Okay.
Brazilians, turn off your screen.
Okay. Right, so there's the winner. Then I want this one. Which team at this tournament do you think will like make a name for themselves? Like who will go on a run or have some sort of like a dark horse factor to them?
Evil Geniuses, if they have Demon 1.
That's big, because obviously some people, especially if they're on the other side of the trash talk, hope that team gets exposed or whatever jazz.
My caveat that I'm going to add to that is I've seen people say Demon 1 has been seen in Japan. I haven't seen anything clarify that he's there to play in Japan. Okay. So that's assuming that he is on the roster, then EG.
Okay. And then the last one, this is the spicy one. You have to pick one of the bigger names to underperform.
NRG.
Ooh, you've gone the betrayal. You've gone against the old Optic boys. Why are you picking them to underperform?
Because I was not impressed with their playoffs run.
Right.
I think that towards the end of the playoffs run, you kind of saw them pick themselves up a little bit. But I think there were parts of that playoffs run where you could see them getting boomed. And I mean, I'm a really big fan of Finesse. I actually really respect Finesse. I really kind of value his philosophy as an IGL, and I love. There isn't a single player on that team that I am not fond of, but I just wasn't super wowed by their playoffs performance. It actually really surprised me, the level to which it kind of let me down. Like, let's not pretend that NRG didn't go 6-3 in the regular season. I mean, it could be worse, but in NA, I shouldn't say NA, in Americas, it was kind of strange because you sort of had these two teams at the top, Loud and Cloud9, who had the same map differential. And then there was this huge kind of mid-table that were all about equal with each other. And then you just had Crew at the bottom who were 0-9, whatever. And I think that NRG, with who they are, what they've done in the past, should have done better than they did. So, yeah, I could absolutely see them underperforming.
My name is Tarek. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel.
As Mary J. Blige said in her track, All I Need, you're all I need to get by, which is the case for me and my Patreon community who support this channel and these videos. Some of them include Theogony, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Tosh, Bot Pounder 420, Thooorin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Yoru, and a special thanks always to the main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in my regular video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content, or you want to take part in one of those longer esports discussions with me where we go all over the place. Well, if any of those grab your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Risk Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.